Hi guys, welcome back to Z's Corner. This is Zao. So for today, I wanted to do a video around Yuki because she's probably one of my favorite PvP officers in the game, and I think she's a little bit underrated. And that's mostly because a lot of players are still at kind of the G3 Epic type level, and at that level, Yuki's usefulness is not really seen as much as when you go a bit higher in level, mostly because for Yuki at that level, when you're fighting, let's say, Enterprise, which is probably the most popular and most common G3 Epic ship, she just doesn't really work. So in this video, we'll go over really quick kind of why she doesn't work against the Enterprise, and also, why she's such a good PvP officer in other scenarios. Let's say when you're not fighting an Enterprise or when you're fighting G4 ships. So I've got Yuki pulled up on my screen here in the game. And let's go over her properties really quick. So her captain ability is the one that's kind of really useful. Is she decreases shield health of the opponent's ship by 10% each round. This is the base. This is the base captain maneuver. It goes much higher with synergy. When you have Marcus on, it goes up to 15%. And if you have either Zhao or Harrison on the other side of the bridge, then that actually goes up to 20% each round. So this is a very, very useful captain maneuver because, shield health mitigates a lot of damage, and until you get through the shields, you're not dealing as much damage as you could to the hull directly. Her officer ability is often overlooked, but it's actually quite useful as well, especially as you start looking at the G4 ships. Some of the Romulan ships there are quite popular, at least on our server. So, having this type of officer ability where you have increased damage, 500% when max based on the health of the crew against Romulan ships, that is very useful in a lot of PvP scenarios. Yuki is part of Section 31, and I've got that group kind of pulled up right now in the Officers tab. They have 4 officers in the group. One is Zhao, one is Yuki, one is Harrison, and one is Marcus. These 4 officers are all very useful in PvP. Marcus we've covered over quite extensively. He's kind of the anti-explorer type officer. Harrison, I have another video on him. He does shield ignore and is a very, very good officer as well. Yuki we're going to cover today, and I guess, Zhao, which is my namesake, we'll cover in another video. So why doesn't Yuki work against an Enterprise? The answer is very simple. It's because the Enterprise has a very, very good ship ability. And that ship ability, here's mine, is as long as the ship has morale, the Enterprise heals the shield health by 25% whenever it gets hit. That percentage, of course, is going to vary depending on ship level. Mine is max, so it's at 25%. So this really equals to what we call forever shields for the Enterprise. As long as you're crewing it correctly and you've got a morale officer, let's say Epic Kirk, on the ship, nobody's ever going to get through the shields, because Yuki's captain ability, if you recall, is basically 10%. Even if you went with full synergy, it's only going to be 20%. So, and that's per round. It's not even per hit. So, if you're firing and you hit that ship, the Enterprise 3 times in a round, it heals its shield health by 75%. So you're never really going to get through the shields on that ship. And because of this, the Enterprise is the best G3 Epic ship for PvP. And so by nature, I guess, a lot of people have Enterprises. So in this case, having Yuki as a primary PvP officer for these G3 ship fights is really not useful. So you don't see that happen a lot at all. So let's take a look at Yuki's usefulness against other G3 ships, namely against the Augur, because the Augur is a Romulan ship, and if we remember, Yuki's officer ability is increased damage versus Romulan ships. So I've got a few battle logs I want to show you real quick from some testing that we did before. Let's pull them up real quick. And, oh, by the way, thank you to Monty for doing some of the testing with me today. He had to do quite a few repairs. So here's an example on screen of Yuki in action. You can see that she almost kills me. And really, with 13k of hull health left, that was really kind of the RNG gods at play. to let me win this fight. I had a pretty classical type of Augur crew on hand where I had 5 of 11 for the mitigation. And then I had Giorgio to proc burning and Tyler to do damage, increase damage. If we look at some of these crews, you know, Tyler, mine is actually T4, so he's a pretty high level Tyler. He does 80% of officer attack damage when the opponent's ship is burning. And the most important part, which is not listed there, is that it's cumulative. So I get more and more of that every single round. I get more and more damage every round, which is really, if you think about it, it was actually really the Augur's Achilles heel and why it doesn't perform so well in PvP. It's because aside from the Obliterator on that ship, which, by the way, doesn't fire until like rounds 2 or 3, that the Augur does really pitiful damage. And it's the primary reason why it gets blown up so often in PvP fights. So Tyler kind of helps mitigate some of those issues, although he doesn't really quite solve all of it. But, you know, my opponent Monty here had Yuki. And you can see that even without Tyler, Yuki is there with, you know, a disruption to the shield health, as well as the plus increased damage to the against my ship. And then he's got Giorgio as well for burning, and he's got HG Worf here for the critical hits. So, you know, this one is really just going to say it could have gone either way when you had a crew set up like Monty's did with the Yuki. So here's an example of Yuki in action, and this is kind of in an alternate role for me. So I had Monty copy what I had before in terms of crewing. He had 5 as captain for the mitigation. He has Tyler, and his Tyler is actually the same tier as mine. And then he has Giorgio on his ship as well to proc burning. You can see in this case I handily beat Monty because of a few things. One, because I had Charvonic. Charvonic here is really both proccing burning when she's captain, but also she's got the 16% of the crew's health bonus to armor piercing. So remember, armor piercing is anti-battleship. So armor piercing is really countering the battleship's armor, and it's reducing its ability to do basic mitigation. So that means I'm dealing more damage to the shields and hull health every single hit. I've got, you know, Yuki here instead of Tyler. I've got Yuki here for the flat out 500% damage bonus, and then I've got HG Warp. If we take a look real quick at the battle log in this case, you see I'm proccing here. You know, you can see that, you know, I do significantly more damage. His Augur fires first because he was attacking. He's doing 150,000 damage per hit with his energy weapons. I'm at, you know, 400,000+ because of Yuki. And then, you know, in addition, look at his mitigation percentage. You know, 166,000 out of 433,000. That's a pretty low mitigation percentage, like 1/3 or less, less than 1/3. And if you look at this, if we keep scrolling, in round 2, my Obliterator hit. So in round 2, because I got the burning from Charvonic, my Obliterator hit for 4.3 million critical hit damage. 4.3 million damage from an Augur. At the G3 Epic level, that is significant. If you hit that against even, let's say, an Enterprise, you know, that would probably blow up most Enterprises, or at least significantly damage it. So it's a very big hit. It's even a big hit for G4, well, for most G4 ships. I think my Coronar, even at T8, critical hit for my Coronar is about 4.5 to 5 million damage, depending on who I'm hitting. So you're also seeing my energy weapons that are doing 1.2 million damage each. That's pretty significant there as well. And you know, so this is kind of the reason why my crew setup totally destroyed Monty's. Now, what happens if Monty kind of used Yuki captain against the same setup? That's the last one I had. So even in this case, I still handily beat him. And why is that? It's because of Charvonic. It's basically because I've got, you know, I've reduced his basic mitigation to a much lower percentage when compared to mine. If we take a look here, you see my Charvonic is proccing. So, my basic mitigation is still, over 50%. It's more like 55, 56%. Whereas if you look at his basic mitigation has been reduced, 221,000 over, 1.2 million. That's like, 18%, 19% basic mitigation. So always keep in mind what you're trying to do with your ship and who your opponent is and how they could be potentially accruing. You don't always have to have Yuki as captain, although Yuki captain is a good type of generic crew. It's not something that's absolutely necessary. So in this case, I did not use Yuki Captain, and even though Monty used Yuki Captain, I still beat him because I crewed against his battleship, and he had a what I would say a much more generic crew on his ship. And even in this case, I forgot to show it before, but my obliterator still procced, and it was not quite as much, but still 4.24 million damage. It's still quite significant, and you can see Yuki's playing a big part in that. So here's another great example of Yuki being very useful at a much higher level. So you can notice that this is going against the triangle. So this is a north cut. It's a tier 4 north cut. I've got a T4 Corvus, and it's going against the triangle. He's got Yuki Marcus Wharf. I've got Yuki Khan Wharf. So in a sense, I was trying to counter what Baller was doing because I had Khan on, and he was definitely countering me because he had Marcus on. I lost handily in this case. Why? Even though I had Yuki, because of Yuki's damage bonus against Romulan ships, and the Corvus is a Romulan ship. And this is a very, very good use of Yuki in conjunction with Marcus being the anti-explorer crew. If we take a look at the battle log in this case, you just basically see that I'm being outgunned. So I'm doing, critical hits of 4.3, 4.5 million. He's got way more damage in terms of critical hit on his north cut. If we scroll down, I'm still doing like 4 something million. His critical hits are at 5 something million. His big guns are firing here, 9.3, 9.8 million on the critical hits. Here's my big guns firing 8.1, 7.9, 9.3. And then he gets some more big gun hits right here, where he basically, I think he already depleted my shield. Yeah, he depleted my shield right before that. So 10 million damage, 9 million damage, and I depleted his shields. Yet I could not deal enough damage. I didn't get lucky here actually with those two, but regardless, I didn't have near enough hull health to kind of survive Baller in this case because of his use of Yuki. So that was a very good use of Yuki to go against the triangle at a very high level, and you can really see why she's so useful in this case. How do you counter that? I will show you guys real quick how I kind of countered it. Here you can see that I had to throw on a very, very specific crew to counter Baller and win my fight. But even with winning this, it was more of a a Pyrrhic. I'm not sure if that's pronounced right, but the Pyrrhic victory here. I had to throw on a crew like this, and it's how does it counter this Yuki setup? Basically, you've got Khan as captain. Because he has Khan, he's a very good chance to proc hull breach. As a reminder, hull breach always increases critical hit damage. So that's increased damage. And we've got Worf here to do critical hits like he's got Worf. And then I've got Myrick. Myrick is almost like Yuki, except it's against Federation ships, and it's based off of defense as opposed to health. So below decks on this ship, I actually switched up my below decks and maxed defense for this fight, which is why you can see that my power dropped actually from the first fight, yet I still won with a pretty... with a bit of a margin, not a huge margin, but with a bit of a margin. If we look at the battle logs, really, I'm just basically out damaging him, and that's all it's going to say. You can see that here my critical hits, if you remember from the first battle, it was only about 4.5 million. My critical hits are jumping to 7.6 million, 7.7 million. So it's a much more significant increase, and you can see that he's only at 6.4, 5.9, etc., etc. So here again, we can take a look and we can keep going, but all you're gonna see is that I'm out damaging him. His big guns are hitting, and he's critting at 9.2, 9.2. My big guns hit, and they crit at a much higher rate. So 14.5, 13.3, 14.9 million damage, and that 14.9 million damage really hurt him a lot because with the previous hit, his shield got depleted. So that one damage took 11.5, 11.6 million whole health from his ship. And with that, it was pretty much game because he just ran out of whole health before me. But she is also very, very useful in this scenario because basically he forced me into a crew setup that was not optimal for takeovers. It was a very specific setup. It's not a general setup. I don't want to take this type of crew and run around and shoot too many ships with it, even with the Corvus, because I get outsized damage to my hull, and the Corvus is really expensive to repair. So thank you guys for tuning in today. I really wanted to spend some time to talk about Yuki because she's probably my favorite PvP officer outside of HG Worf. HG Worf is my favorite. But Yuki is still a strong second. I find her useful in many different scenarios. I showed her in this video. I showed her being useful at the G3 Epic level against Augurs. I also showed you a real quick, much more high-level view of Yuki being used against in G5 ship fights. Thank you again for tuning in. If you're not a subscriber, please hit the subscribe button and feel free to leave comments below, and I will get back to you as soon as possible. Have a great night. Thank you.